Hi there guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Suze Nethercutt. I am a long-time professional artist and of the last 18 months or so a master's candidate in visual art. So you can see me here in my university studio just after I've returned from my first artist residency, which was in Tasmania. If you haven't checked out those two videos that I made of that residency, I will link them in the description and also somewhere above here so you can go and see where all of this work began, because this is very much a continuing adventure. I am really lucky to have a studio space at my university where I can spread out and have all of my master's work around me. I do also work in my home studio, which you'll see me doing a bit later on in this video. But my first port of call on returning from my residency was to unpack everything that I made there and get it up in the studio so that I could get to work with planning some major works for my exhibition. For those of you who don't know, I am doing a master's by research, which means that I am doing a research project as part of my master's. So it is partly assessed by exhibition of artwork and also by exegesis, which is kind of another name for a smaller thesis that you write for a degree of this kind. So you can see me here, I'm just pinning up some photos that I printed off of some bark samples that I took of the tree that you just saw me pinning up on the wall there. I took some absolutely gorgeous photos and made some works in those previous videos I was talking about. So I really wanted to have some little thumbnail photographs available of those samples of tree bark. I had lots of little sketches and artworks to unpack, and you can see here a couple of the photographic collages that I made also about my historical subject, Louisa Ann Meredith, who I also talk a lot about in those first two videos. So go check that out if you want to know those stories. I have these great shelves that I put up, just picture rail shelves in my studio so that I can arrange artworks around me as they're evolving. I find it really important to have artworks pinned up or up on these rails or just around me. Whatever I'm working on, the body of work needs to be there as I'm working, because I do find that one artwork always leads to another. You can see me arranging here a multi-panel artwork I made of a tree at the residency, and also the sketch that I initially made for that next to it that shows the correct configuration. You can see an artist book I made of Louisa Ann Meredith. I'm moving that tree around from its original position and just getting all of that artwork ready in front of me, because what you're going to see in this video is me conceptualizing and coming up with the next phase of major artworks that I'm going to do for this project. I'll just give you a little tour now of some of the previous works that I've been making for my master's project. I've talked about them all at various times in this channel where I am vlogging the experience of doing my master's, so you might want to scroll back and have a look at some of them as they've unfolded. But I always use these shelves for the work that I'm doing currently in the project, so I can keep them all grouped together, and changing it over into this new body of work after the residency was a really powerful thing for me and really helped me start to generate ideas. You will remember, if you saw the residency videos, that I had a great pinboard there that I had all of this work up on, and it was great to bring it back here and reconfigure it and then look at it next to some of the previous work that I've made. These leaves with photographs in them are part of a body of work that I made about an experience I had in a forest in Scotland. I connected very deeply with some of the trees and nature in that part of the world, and this body of work here that you can see is of that experience. And then some earlier works that I've made of gardens that are significant to me. A big part of the research process is making sure that I'm keeping a record of the thoughts that I'm having as I'm working on the project, making sure my research notes are up to date, making sure that I am capturing experiences like I had at this residency. So I have a few different journals that I use, and you can see me here just cutting out pictures that are going to go into my studio journal, where I write about some of the ideas that I'm having for what my project is actually going to look like at the end of the day. I'm now at the time where I need to start nailing down into making decisions about what the shape of it is going to be and what the artwork is going to be. I've sort of been playing with a lot of different ideas over the past 20 months or so. And yeah, I'm now at the stage where I need to make some decisions. So you can see me here just processing some of those thoughts as I stick some photos into my notebooks and think about that. As I mentioned earlier, when I was in Tasmania, I took some beautiful photographs of tree bark, and they're actually the tree bark of those large trees that you could see in that sketch that I was pinning up earlier. And I was using those to make really beautiful mixed media paintings, which are a mixture of Neocolor 2 water-soluble wax pastels by Karen Dash and also oil paint. So I was really keen to expand on this project and do a few more sketches in my accordion sketchbook of some of the samples that I think could work really beautifully as paintings. As you can see, they kind of look like beautiful abstract paintings in their own right, these bark samples, which was part of what really inspired me. But I have an idea of how I want to use these paintings in a finished context in my exhibition, and you're going to see that unfold throughout this video. One of the most exciting things about working in this medium is how I can use a wet rag to drag through it to recreate the texture of the bark. The trees that I am working with have this beautiful bark that peels off and reveals this white tree underneath. It's very smooth, so there's a lot of different textural detail. So I've been really enjoying looking into ways that I can recreate that texture, and also looking into ways that I can make sure it's archival as possible, because the combination that I'm using is a little bit unusual. One of the ideas that I had at the residency, which I executed while I was there, was a painting of a tree, which was recreated from a drawing that was done by my historical subject, Louisa Ann Meredith, that I did over several linen panels that were all separated. And you can see an example here of that tree that I did over the multiple panels. So I really love this concept, and I knew that I wanted to expand it further in a large work for my exhibition. And as I was laying out the panels on the floor and conceiving of how it was going to look, I realized pretty quickly that it was going to be very hard to execute this project at this uni studio, and that I would need to move home to set up a space where I could do this multi-panel artwork. The interesting part is that I realized that this concept could be coupled with another project that I've had on the go for the last few months, but it all came together as this perfect configuration that I felt really excited about. So let's move over to the home studio and have a look at what I've been getting up to there. You're here inside my bedroom, and you're here for a reason, and that is the settee that you can see in front of my bed here. I bought this a few months ago at an antique store. I saw it and immediately had a visualization of a project that I wanted to do with it. And that project involves me turning the upholstery of this couch into a substrate for painting. Now, I'm going to fill you in through the second half of this video how this fits with the multi-panel artwork. But I first of all just wanted to show you the preparation of this couch. I did quite a lot of research on different ways that I could turn the upholstery of this couch into a substrate. I thought about potentially reupholstering it in a linen that I have for painting here that's already pre-primed. But I really wanted to actually use the upholstery itself as it's an integral part of the piece of furniture. I did a lot of research online and discovered that you can in fact stain the upholstery of furniture with chalk paint. And I've been tinkering around, watching lots of YouTube tutorials and talking to experts who have used this technique over the past couple of months. I've tested it out on a chair that you can see there with a bit of green tape on it at the back of my studio, and have decided that this is the technique that I'm going to use for this couch. So it's been an enormous job already. You can see me here just trimming off some of the really loose threads that are on this settee because I did do a previous piece of furniture that had quite a few loose threads and it didn't really turn out very well having those hanging out. So I thought I will remove these from the couch before I treat it. And I chose to use Annie Sloan chalk paint. This is not sponsored. I did look at a couple of different other brands. One of them was Rust-Oleum, which I had heard could be really good for this technique, except that in Australia they changed the ingredients of the paint so that it doesn't work as well as the other kinds of chalk paint do. So I chose the Annie Sloan. I spent a lot of time choosing the right colours. And then I got to painting this couch. You start off by painting the upholstery with water so that you make it nice and wet. And then you go in with a watered down version of the paint itself. And what this does is creates a staining effect rather than a painting effect. So you're actually able to maintain the softness of the fabric because it isn't being actually painted. So the idea is to do a couple of layers of this watered down paint, and then you have a brand new upholstery on your piece of furniture. My aim was to match the colour of the paint with the colour of the linen of the substrates that I'm going to use for the multi-panel painting, because this couch or settee, whatever you want to call it, is going to become part of a bigger artwork that involves those panels. The reason I really love this method is that you can continue to use it as a piece of furniture because it doesn't feel like paint on the surface. If you just painted a couch like this with acrylic paint, for example, it would go really crusty and horrible and it wouldn't be very nice to sit on. In using this technique, you maintain the softness of the cloth and it can in fact still be used as a piece of furniture. So that was really important to me when figuring out how I was going to do a painting on this settee. The other element was considering what medium to use, because if I was going to paint with oil paint, for example, I really would have had to have used a primed substrate, whether it be linen or canvas, and then it would have that sort of crispy hardness to it, and it wouldn't feel like a piece of furniture that could be used. When I was talking to the lady that owned the shop where I bought this paint, she was incredibly helpful, and I was trying to understand how I could layer this and what I could paint the couch with afterwards. The way that she explained it to me is it's quite similar to fresco. So for those of you who don't know, fresco paintings are what you see a lot of in Italy, in old churches in Florence, for example, are full of incredible frescoes that are painted onto plaster, which is painted on when it's wet. So it's this very absorbent medium. So that was very helpful to me in sort of understanding the porousness of the chalk paint and how this would work. So it took several layers to get this settee painted. You can see it here after the first layer of paint, and it's still quite translucent, and I didn't want it to be quite that translucent. So I'm going in for a second coat, and I'm also lightening it up a bit because it's a little bit dark, and I'm trying to match the colour to the linen of my substrates of my paintings that are going to pair up with this piece. And yeah, going around the edges and the trims as well, I was really glad that I spent quite a considerable amount of time taping up this piece to make sure that it would be protected. So I did that coat, and that was looking quite good in terms of coverage, and there wasn't too much of the colour shining through. But I realised after it dried that it was actually quite a lot darker and greener than I wanted. It wasn't as warm as the tone of the canvases that I'm using. So I decided to do a third coat. So I gave it a little sand. One of the things you can do as you're working through the layers, if you're doing more than two, is you can actually sand the furniture just to soften it back up again, and it works really well if it is getting a little bit hard. So I played around with some of the other colours that I had that were a bit warmer. I played around with some pigment that I had on my studio shelf to mix up a warmer tone that was going to match that linen strip that you can see there in the video, and went in for my final layer, which was perfect. So that is now complete, and I am excited to show you how this will fit in with the concept that I have for this new multi-panel artwork, including this settee. But the first thing to do was to do a bit of mocking up of this concept to see what was going to work. I had done some preliminary sketches of this back when I first got the couch, and I just took a photo of it and mocked it up in Procreate, and you can see that illustration here. But I wanted to look at some other references and bring it more in line with some of the trees that I specifically want to work with in my masters. So it was back to research phase. I'm constantly dancing between research and art making in my masters. It's this bit of a juggle that I'm always trying to find the balance with, but I actually really enjoy it because it gives me time to pause between the art making process to check in and make sure that what I'm choosing to create in the studio is really aligned with other ideas that I'm having that have broader and deeper meaning. So I've just printed off a couple of photos of this couch to work with, and I'm also just going online to get some resources for these trees online to make sure that there's going to be some accuracy. My idea at this stage is to work with a blackwood tree. Blackwood is more commonly known in Australia as wattle, but it was used quite widely as a furniture timber in the 19th century during the colonial period, and right up until the first decades of the 20th century it was quite popular. So I feel like this is a really appropriate tree to use as the motif for this piece of furniture. I'm still thinking about that. I haven't 100% committed to the blackwood tree because I actually would like to find out what this settee is made of, because I don't know what timber it's made of, and I feel like there could be a story there that could be told that's better than this idea. So here is the concept sketch that I have at the moment. The other thing that I've been doing, which has become really, really important at this stage, is starting to really think about where my master's project is going in terms of how I am going to narrow down and choose what I'm going to discuss in what is actually a reasonably short document. I have a lot of different themes and things going on in the work that I've made for my master's so far. So what I did was I actually printed out just some postage stamp sized photographs of some of the artworks that I've made so far, and I stuck them onto index cards and started to break them down into different themes so that I could get a sense for where I can take this project and how I can structure the exegesis and also the final exhibition that I'm starting to produce artwork for. So I thought it was really important at this stage to pause and to really think about that before I progress with one of the biggest artworks for the exhibition, and make sure that I'm on track with that part of the work. I feel like I'm constantly playing Studio Tetris, both here in my home studio and also the one at uni. I feel like I spend an inordinate amount of time moving things around, but I think that's just a bit of a necessary evil when you're an artist. So, of course, this is my main work table in my home studio, and I needed to figure out how I'm going to store these index cards in a way visually that I can refer to them and have them out of the way off the table. So I just decided to stick them onto this board here so that I can constantly be thinking about what I'm doing, moving things around, adding additional notes to it, and making sure that it's kind of a living document, because I feel like this is going to be really productive for me in narrowing down some ideas, in working through some of those ideas with my supervisors, getting advice on, what reasonably I can fit into the project size that I'm doing, because this is not a PhD, it's only a master's. It probably can't contain all of these concepts. So I'm hoping that this board will be really, really useful moving forward, and also that I can easily move it around and add to it whenever I need to. You can see here I have some leather journal covers that I use for my studio journal and also for my research notes. So the black one I tend to use for the studio journal, which you saw me working in earlier. And these are handmade journals. I actually really enjoy making my own journal covers. I have had some leather lying around for a few years in my shed, and recently started making these for both my research journals, my studio journal, which are just moleskins, and also my handmade accordions. I'm just in the process of finishing a small, very affordable online class about how to make your own leather journal cover. So if that's something that interests you, pop on over to the link in the description. I should have it up by the time this video goes live. I prepared a little bit of my linen with some of the same paint that I used to paint the settee with, because I wanted to test out the painting that I'm going to make on this settee long before I actually set paintbrush to it. Chalk paint is a really new medium to me. I have seen some really interesting things online where artists are using these paints to produce artwork, and in fact produce historically inspired artwork, which feels a little bit relevant for the way that I work. So I wanted to just have a play around with painting a blackwood tree on this little sample piece of linen to see how the paint behaves, to see how I'm going to paint on it. I really don't have too solid of an idea as to what effect I'm going for with the tree on this settee at this stage. So this is really just an opportunity for me to play around and see how the paint behaves. Again, I'm watering it right down the same way that I did when I actually painted the upholstery, because I don't want it to be too thick and heavy on the surface. I want it to be very impregnated into the cloth of the fabric of the upholstery. So this was a really fun little adventure, and it gave me a feel for how I'm going to paint in this medium. It does behave very differently to oil paints or to the other medium I've been working with a lot, which are the Neocolor 2s. But yeah, there's nothing like just getting in there and having a go to see how it's going to behave. I'm really pleased with the colours that I got. I want to keep this really, really neutral, sort of in the browns and graphite colours. I keep it just very neutral and similar to some of the other artworks that I've been working on, particularly that multi-panelled piece that was inspired by Louisa Ann Meredith. As I'm working away in the studio, I've also been taking the opportunity to digitize some of the artwork that I made on the residency. I find that keeping up with creating photographs and digital records of my artwork is so enormously time consuming, and the best way to keep up with it is to just kind of wedge it in between other things that I'm doing in the studio. Scans take a really long time when you do them at very high resolution, and yeah, so this is a perfect thing to do in between layers of this painting. I'm getting a real feel now for how much the pigment sinks back into the chalk paint when you paint in this way. It's giving me a really good sense for how this is going to feel on the couch. And I'm still thinking about if this is the right tree to use and the right composition to use. I like the overall concept, especially the part where I'm going to have those roots coming down the bottom, feeding into those long lines of wood that come out the side of the settee. So next time you see it on the screen, just have a look there and you will probably see what I mean. And then it was time to play some more Studio Tetris to get ready to set up these multiple panels and the settee all together. But this required a bit of a cleaning up in the studio to happen. It's so amazing how you manage to accrue so much junk in an art studio. I think perhaps artists are experts at being hoarders. We don't want to throw anything away in case it becomes useful. And I literally had things everywhere. All of my plant samples were hanging everywhere. So I wanted to move them to my wall, which is dedicated to storing dried plants. I just had to generally clean up that whole section of the studio so I could prepare my big painting board here for setting up the panels. So the first step was to set up the settee, and you can see here I'm just placing the painting that I just did on the settee to get a feel for how that's going to look when I do paint a tree on it. And you might be able to see a bit more clearly now what I mean about those roots are going to lead into those side bits of timber that come up the side of the settee. And now I'm just bringing in some of those linen panels that I brought home from my uni studio and starting to think about how I want them to be in relationship to the settee, because I envisage the painted settee as being in front of these panels that are going to be stacked on top of each other on the wall. And over those panels, I plan to paint a version of this large sketch that you also saw me making when I was at the artist residency. And then when it came time to set up the panels, I had to call in the Brains Trust, my husband, Mark, to help me to do it, because this was really a two-person job and it took me a really long time to figure out how to do it. Let's see if I can wedge this in so I don't have to move everything again, because I'm seriously, all I'm doing is moving. I don't want to have to move this. I moved it 3 times. I just had to leave that bit in there because by this stage I was a few days into this project and nothing was direct. I have so much footage of failed attempts at things in the last couple of weeks, and I was really getting quite cranky at this stage of the game. So it was really helpful for Mark to come in and give me a hand, because putting up this canvas, I wanted to make sure that whatever I did in constructing the panels in a group on this surface was going to translate at the other end when it's in exhibition. So I wanted to make sure that everything was incredibly straight. I wanted to make sure I used a spirit level to get all the levels right in the way that I set up the canvases, so that there wasn't going to be crooked ones showing up in the exhibition. There were just so many things that I needed to figure out in the process of mocking this up, and this was why it wasn't possible to do it in the uni studio. I really needed that big board that I have at the back of my studio that I can nail into, so that I could play around with scale and get everything set up correctly. So it was all a bit of a process, and I couldn't have done it without Mark to help me. I'm incredibly grateful. Anyone who has a partner that helps them with the logistical aspects of their art will know how essential it is to have supportive people around you to help you resolve these problems and figure it out. Yeah, but we did get there in the end, which was fantastic. There was quite a bit of to and fro with arranging the canvases and getting the configuration right. But we got there in the end, and I found a grouping of canvases that was very pleasing and was ready to commence work. The next step was to transfer the projected image onto the linen. I have talked a little bit before on my channel about using projectors in the studio before. I just find them really helpful for saving time, basically, and transferring concepts onto a canvas for painting. So you can see me here. My preferred method is to use white charcoal because I'm working on natural toned linen. And I find this is just a really easy, simple way to be able to transfer the image, to not have a dark charcoal that's going to create a lot of darks in my paintings because I try to keep them very light. So this took quite a few hours. It actually stretched over a couple of days. You can just see here, this is the type of charcoal that I use. And I was really thinking a lot of the time about how much of my drawing I was going to use and how much I wasn't, because I don't want to make a direct copy of the drawing. I definitely wanted those two main trees in the composition, but I was really having to think through all the different elements that I want to put in there that aren't in that drawing. The next day, it was time to settle in for some serious painting. So I got the studio set up with some great lighting, as I always try to do. And I wanted to really warm up for this one because I was intending that the first layer of these trees be in the Neo Colour 2s, the water-soluble wax pastels by Caran d'Ache. So I wanted to warm up because I hadn't used them for about a week at this stage, and I feel like it's really important to be feeling really fluid with the medium that you're working with when you're getting into a final painting like this, so that I could be really free and spontaneous with the way that I was moving. So I did another one of those lovely little square panels of a bark sample, and then I got started with the painting. It was still a bit nerve-wracking going with it at the start because the scale is so different, and of course I'm not painting a bark sample, I'm painting a tree. But before long I really found that I was finding my groove with using the pastels and the wipes to create this first layer of the trees. But I'm going to finish up here today and leave these trees where they're at, and I will be sure to jump back in and show you how it all progresses in the next video. Now, if you've stayed to the end of this video, how about you give me a book emoji, since there was a considerable amount of nerdy talk in this video. And yeah, let me know your thoughts. Like, how do you like to work? Do you dance between research and painting, or are you all about jumping in and just getting on with the artwork? I'm really curious to know what your preferred methods are of working, and also if you've learned anything here today that was really helpful for you. Thanks so much for being here for another video. If you've enjoyed this today, make sure you give it a like. You can even hype it if you want to. It doesn't cost you anything, makes a big difference to my little channel. And if you haven't subscribed already and you're liking what you're seeing, then maybe hit the subscribe button. All right, take care until next time. I'll catch you then. Bye.